All right, so we are on to our last movie, Mr. Holland's Opus.
Yes.
This was
and you and I haven't talked about it because you just watched it yesterday. So
yeah, I watched it last night. I think I told you okay, so this was a request of spoilers for Mr. Holland's Opus and for any movie we might talk about. We're definitely going to go talk about the whole thing. This was a request from a friend of mine, somebody I don't really see anymore, but I used to hang out with, play disc golf with, and I'm sure if I saw again, I'd have we'd be friends and friendly and all that. And he's watching our videos, which is really neat. And so
you should just say thank you instead of saying like we're not really friends. But
no, I was saying we're friends. I don't see him anymore because he lives I'm weird and awkward. I don't know how to do this. You think you're the only weird. I'm weird and awkward too. Anyways, so he wanted. I can't remember if he said this was his favorite or one of his favorites or something, but he just wanted to hear our take on it. And so here it is, and I am fully truthful no matter what because that's who I am. And it's interesting.
Are you
should synopsis or should I synopsis?
Yeah, you get to synopsis. This is kind of your project.
Okay, so Mr. Holland's Opus stars Richard Dreyfuss as Mr. Holland. I forget his first name. And he is a music aficionado and he wants to, I guess, work at an orchestra and conduct an orchestra.
Be a composer specifically.
Be a composer, sorry, there we go, composer. And but he has like a teaching credential to fall back on and things. He was in a band and that didn't quite work out. So now we're joining him as he starts his first day at school as the music teacher. And basically the movie it's kind of an epic where we follow him from day one of his tenure as a teacher to the last day of his tenure as a teacher. And it's 30 years. And he, there's he has a kid and he doesn't. This your cat.
Sorry, my cat's being crazy. It's not. Your synopsis is fine.
Thank you. My cat is sleeping. It's nice. So he has a kid partway through, and that his kid ends up being not entirely deaf. I guess he's really hard of hearing. He ends up liking his job. He never really makes it as a composer. He helps some young minds out and really get them out into the world, and it's kind of about that journey and that process. And that's basically the plot of it. And I have to say, I enjoyed this. And my initial sort of critique on it is that it is not ultimately, it's not like what I would call a super interesting movie or even a movie with much conflict. Certainly some inner turmoil, but not always conflict. Sometimes the conflict feels a little pushed on. But in that way, it actually makes me think of a Marvel movie. This is a sentimental, dramatic version of a Marvel movie where like it hits all the beats. It's a solid story. It's not really shooting for the stars. It's more shooting for like, a 3-pointer as opposed to like a half-court shot. And it's why did I do a sports reference? It's kind of hits that, it's well put together. There's some music.
Well, speaking of sports references, what movie this makes me think of?
What?
Rocky. It's just like a sentimental.
Yeah, it's a sentimental movie, and a part of what makes those movies work weirdly with sentimental movies, like if you were to make this movie more interesting and I think more maybe long lasting in a sense of like have a more interested critic audience or even just general audience, you'd have to kind of change the movie to be something else. Like sentimental movies tend not to have a lot of conflict. They tend not to be super. They're supposed to give you the warm fuzzies and to make you feel. And I think that's why I like sentimental movies sometimes is because you and I get really heady in all this like deeper introspective dramas or out there sci-fi or really, fun rom-coms or whatever. Rom-coms have more emotions, but like, and so I don't always get a lot of emotion from the movies I'm watching, but like this, I got, this movie got me. So even though it's not super interesting, like I can't say that I've seen this story done before and I've seen it done better or worse. But like it got me and I liked it. And Richard Dreyfuss is really good in this. He apparently won or he got nominated for an Oscar or whatever. And I thought he was just really good in it. And so like it's got these things, but I at the end of the day, it is kind of like, well, it's a sentimental drama. It kind of checks all the boxes. It doesn't shoot for anything too high, but I enjoyed it and it had too much music.
Well, it's not just sentimental, it's feel good. And I was kind of curious what you'd think of it because in a way it's a more Theo movie than a Sarah because it's very straightforward. Like as I was watching it, I was thinking of what would make it something I really liked. And I do like it. But something I really liked would be kind of maybe a more unconventional narrative, kind of like, you know, doing something a little weird with it. I don't know. I mean, but that's I struggle with biopics, like,
Yeah.
and this isn't a biopic, but it's like a biopic.
It approaches being one.
Yeah, because I just find biopics very kind of like A to B to C to D to E.
Yeah.
And unless it's like, you know, they did the Steve Jobs one where it was like 3 different moments from his life. I thought that was a little more interesting to me than,
Yeah.
you know.
See, weirdly, so here's the thing, you like standard storytelling, like with something like a Marvel movie, or not even just a Marvel movie, but that kind of action movie, or like a rom-com, or really anything, you don't really, you like the off the beaten path characters and story types, and that includes like some genres like rom-coms have such strict A to B to C like stories that like you want there to be there'd be a gap in between A and B, like in the Steve Jobs almost, where they like you jump time like that. So like it's this
I hate
movie,
it when we jump time in rom-coms, but I know what you mean.
but like so like in this it's kind of it is a pretty standard. I like a lot of standard straightforward stories because
right, I would say straightforward a little more than standard, but yeah,
maybe straightforward stories, because like here's we're all working from this point roughly, like of course not every story fits into the classic structure, but like here's the classic story structure, it's a straight line, and then like how does it deviate from that line? Maybe it bends over here, maybe it does something over here, and like some of the times you're working in like millimeters or whatever is less, like a decameter, I don't know, whatever is less than a millimeter, and it's like I kind of am interested in what those minute changes are to make it interesting, which is why I like all these straightforward stories, including this one, because it's a story I've seen, but like what minute changes are they doing to make it interesting or really change how
I mean, and that's how I feel about rom-coms sometimes, is like you see the same thing over and over, but they do something a little different.
I'm getting there with rom-coms too, and I think it just took watching enough of them for me to get there.
I mean, it does. I mean, it's like anything. When you first try it, you don't have anything to compare it against. It's you don't really even know what you're looking at. You know, you may have an idea if you like it or not.
Yeah.
But so I really like the messages of this film. I mean, the feel-good part of this is that sometimes life doesn't go like you plan, and you still end up really enjoying it. And also, you may not notice the differences you're making in life. I mean, that whole ending bit is about how, you know, he ends up being forced to retire because the arts get cut.
Yeah.
And he feels like he's made no difference because, you know, the fact that they're getting rid of him means that he doesn't matter. Right. But then at the end, you know, he's leaving the school for the last time and they've gathered to have a huge celebration of him. And he finds out that really, you know, he changed all these lives. And that's what really matters, not that, you know, he was forced into retirement. And like, I have to say, like, I find the dialogue in this film at times painful. Some of the comedy doesn't work for me. I really don't care for the Rowena bit. And the thing with the son, it's a little on the nose, but it also is really true to what happened to a lot of, he's a part of deaf culture, even if he has 10% of his hearing left. That is what happened to, and they were kind of honest in a way about how fathers in that at that time could be, you know, and but it was still depicted kind of black and white. And then the end comes and I'm crying. I mean, what can I say? I'm even getting a little choked up just because I think as people, we all want, not we all, that's not true, but a lot of us want to like make a difference and be out there and like, you know, be important, and in being important we're going to do this thing and see this change and so on. And the truth is most of us live smaller lives, and we're kind of like, well, I didn't become that person I thought I was going to be, and I clearly don't matter. And that's not true. Like you affect all the people's lives who you interact with in ways that you'll never know. I worked in retail for a decade, maybe, let's say, and you know, it could feel like, what was the point of that? But the truth is, I don't know how I affected some of those people. You know, like people would come in for help. You know, who knows how I changed anyone's day, kind of a thing. No one's going to gather in an auditorium for me and tell me, but it's nice to think that. It's nice to think that you have importance in people's lives, regardless of
yeah,
you know. And I love that message. I just you know, for me, it's I wish it were done with a little more subtlety. I wish every fight with his family wasn't, you care more about the kids at the school than you do about your own.
yeah, that's the manufactured conflict right there.
Yeah, like they could have those exact same arguments, but just with a little more nuance and subtlety.
Yeah.
I wish I'd seen him try to understand his son, but be kind of bullheaded about it. And I really wish that Rowena stuff had been shorter. I never enjoy that section. I've seen this movie more than once. I've seen it 2 or maybe 3 times.
Which is surprising to me. This really doesn't strike me as a Sarah movie.
I think it's when it came out. I think it was like playing on airplanes when I was flying, you know, on long flights or something. I just ended up, there's some movie like Apollo 13 is really good movie, but like I forgot how much I'd seen it until we rewatched, because I hadn't watched it in like 15 years, and then we rewatched it the other day, and I'm like, I know all these like, it's weird how
right.
But this came out in like 95, which is right around when I really started getting into movies, to be honest. So so yeah, so it's Luna has something to say about, what did you think of the movie? Yeah, and I think Richard Dreyfuss, I think some of the performances really make it. He really makes it. It's interesting to see Terrence Howard when he was younger, and
that was interesting.
I mean, you know, and I know people who are teachers. I have friends who are teachers, and it's interesting because I have friends in particular where she really just does it as a job, honestly. And I think she's probably a good teacher, but she doesn't have a lot of passion for it. But her husband is like, he's probably a Mr. Holland to all, like he's really involved, and really, it's really his passion. And I mean, it sounds kind of mawkish and sentimental, and you know, I'm kind of a cold bitch, and I like, you know, I like things that are a little less warm toned in my movies, but it is true, you know. I can think of teachers that made a difference in my life, and
well, that's kind of one of the things about this movie that's interesting is, you know, we watched that documentary about Mr. Rogers, and that's about really young kids, but later in that documentary he runs into one of somebody at a graduation, and they're like, you know, it was really important. She said something like, I was really sick when I was younger, and it was, you know, you were on, and I watched you a lot, and you were really important to me. And he's, you know, it's a really sweet thing. And it's like, it's not like that doesn't happen when you're older. I mean, a lot of, you know, you listen to things on YouTube, interviews or stuff, and it's like how important this one person was in my 20s or my 30s or my 40s to my development. And so it's like, but there's something about, you know, being young and getting older and still really appreciating what that person did for you. So, you know, the fact that, I mean, I think it's specifically important that he's a teacher.
Yeah.
You know? And anybody who's helping to shape young minds, as they say, like that, I think, even though, again, it's not unique exactly, it is kind of important to a story like this. And I think it's a part of what gets you, is because we all, you know, a lot of people remember the really important teachers when they were younger, because they really helped you develop at an era where you were developing a lot. You know, our brains are developing so much when we're kids, basically, until our 20s or maybe our 30s, I don't know. But like that, I feel like they tend to, even though somebody in your 30s might help you as much as a teacher did when you were a teenager, you probably remember your teacher more fondly because of how much you grew at that time, almost. And I think there's an aspect to that in this, which is interesting. And like, that is a part of the sentimental feels that you get.
It's interesting. I hated high school, and there were some teachers that were like, who I still think about, but in general, I don't have a lot of nostalgia for high school. I have trouble watching some of the romances and stuff that are high school, because I just hated it. I just hated everything about it. But I think so that doesn't get me so much as the lack of cynicism. It's kind of nice to see something that's, you know, not cynical. And it's just easy to be cynical, and a lot of things are cynical, and I think we're more cynical now than we were, and we'll probably go through there are, I think, decades where we're less cynical culturally than others, and we're not in one of those decades. And I think the 90s might have been more that way. I don't know, I'd have to look at it. So that's nice. And I also wanted to just touch on, there's just some seeing time pass and just, thinking about some of his teaching methods feel a little dated, but they would have been like that made me think of the documentary we watched, not about Mr. Rogers, but the one about the wrestling coach who, he was a real hard ass. And, I don't think that kind of teaching is as accepted as it used to be. But also to see like what it would have been like to be a teacher around the Vietnam War, where you really were the kids that you had just taught were just dying right after and it was interesting. There was no real racial, Terrence Howard shows up, and also Damon Whitaker, who's Forrest's brother, and looks exactly like him.
Whitaker showed up,
and I think at one point there was someone who looked Asian, and this is like some small town in Oregon, which really would have probably been seriously white because that's how Oregon works. But there was no kind of discussion. But I did kind of think it was interesting that they made Terrence Howard's character the one that went away to Vietnam and died, because there was a disproportionate number of Black men who went over to Vietnam and probably as a result died. We watched The Five Bloods recently, so that was kind of on my mind. But it's not a movie that's here to critique any of that stuff. It's really just about a warm feeling.
Normally something like that would bother me more because it bothered me a little for a specific reason, but normally in general that would bother me more because. So I have a number of things to say in relation to what you've said. So we now
I'll stop talking for a little, let you go.
In broad culture, we talk more about the institutions and about the systems of oppression, prejudice, racism, whatever, than we used to. Now, it's probably because, I don't know, it's more in the popular culture, even if, it's probably been around for longer than that because minorities are more aware of it. Anyways. So I think that plus our current political state has left a lot of people, no matter where you're from, feeling cynical about life, the universe, and everything. And I mean, we're still in the pandemic. We're almost a year into when, the lockdown order came down for you and me for a pandemic. So like there's a lot of cynicism right now. And a movie like Mr. Holland's Open is kind of warm fuzzies. And so again, the fact that there's less conflict, like there's still conflict, but it's much more situational. So it doesn't work and it feels more manufactured. Usually I feel like it's more difficult to make a sentimental movie work because the conflict, you have to be so much more careful with how you do the conflict. Anyways, but so one of the things with Terrence Howard's character is he's kind of a guy. He's not very smart, but he's not an idiot. He's not really a school guy. He could have had. Now it almost feels like he has ADHD or something that they definitely would have been looking at the time. Yeah, and like who knows? He probably is the kind of person who maybe could have gone and had a successful career in something, but maybe he wasn't destined to be an engineer or a mathematician or something. But his character dies in the Vietnam War. And I liked how that probably is true to life. It's really sad, and you have to have a sad moment like that to appreciate how poignant Mr. Holland's life was. And so normally in a more modern, like in a movie now, I'd be like, you wonder if they'd at least make a comment on the race there or really touch on it, but they don't really do that, except that Mr. Holland is showing another student, Stadler, like that kid had to work really hard to get everywhere. You don't have to work really hard to get everywhere, kind of as a point of like, you have it easy in comparison to some other people. You should really, he's basically saying, check your privilege. And not that we would have used those terms back then. You're right. That is kind of the 70s version of it. Yeah. Right. And I kind of appreciate what he's doing. There's really the one problem is it's kind of a stereotype. A Black man has died so that a white person can learn something. It is kind of authentic to real life, though. I don't know. I'm kind of left in this weird spot in the middle where I'm like, I think this fits into a problematic trope, even if in a vacuum, even if not in a vacuum, even if I don't think this is like the worst case of it. But it also but again, it's also illustrating what really happened is that Black people struggled more and then ended up dying more because of just the way institutions are set up. So it's not untrue. Not untrue. Would it have been better if he'd been showing like the Damon Whitaker character? maybe. I don't
Then it
know.
would have felt like he was telling a black student to check his privilege and another black
Right. So
student's
it's
death.
like that's where it's like I don't really know that there's a solution.
Yeah.
Maybe this is the best way it could have been done, but I don't know. Anyways, and so I had one more point and I've lost it. It left my brain.
I have a question for you if you want. I haven't
Um,
watched any of these in ages, but I know you like I've never watched Rudy. I know you didn't you like Remember the Titans
I like
or
Remember the Titans.
isn't this kind of in that kind of a vein?
Rudy, Remember the Titans. I tend to think of October Sky. October Sky is up there as like one of my favorite movies.
I'm
And
smiling because I recently looked up October Sky because of something in my novel, and it's one of your favorite movies, and I've never watched it.
oh, that's
I've
right.
never
I always
watched.
forget.
I've
It's
never
not.
watched October Sky, and I've never watched Rudy. I have watched Remember the Titans, but it's
I'm
been
not sure
a
you'd really be an October
while.
Sky person, but I tend to think about October Sky isn't sentimental the way
Mhm.
that a lot of these movies are, but I tend to think of it as being kind of the best version of a sentimental movie, although Remember the Titans actually might be the best version of a sentimental movie because it has a lot in it and it
Mhm.
tackles race in a way I haven't seen it in a while that while probably isn't quite up to progressive modern standards, there is something there. Like I would put Mr. Holland's Opus maybe below like Remember the Titans and maybe like equal with Rudy, like as far as like how it feels. Rudy's shorter, so I think it wins out because Mr. Holland's Opus, the Rowena stuff is what I wanted to talk about, has like just too much in it. It's a bit too long.
Mhm.
I like it when my epics and my biopics are longer because I feel the weight of them more. But in this case, the Rowena stuff is really interesting, and I kind of like the implication. Like every teacher has a couple of students they taught where they were like, oh, this person is going to go on to be famous. Probably has more than that, but and they know that some percentage of those students will go on to become famous because somebody taught Tom Cruise, like somebody was Tom Cruise's teacher, right? And
Right.
so like, did they think Tom Cruise was going to go on to be a
Right.
successful actor? So I kind of appreciate that idea of Rowena. I just didn't get it. I wasn't really there for the like teacher-student relationship thing. I don't, I'm not against showing these things in movies. It just didn't really feel right to me. Like
Yeah.
anything, I'm not here to limit art or say that we should censor art.
It
It's just
felt out of place.
felt out of place.
Also, just it was so long. Like we watched her
Yeah.
sing all these songs, and I'm like, I don't want to. Also, I don't like watching singing, but
Yes, you don't like
that's
watching
me.
things. And my biggest complaint with that is like it would belong there like way more if they actually put some sort of conclusion on it.
Yeah.
Like instead, we don't get anything with her after that. We don't know if she succeeded,
Right.
if she failed.
True.
That part
True.
just disappears. And it's like if they actually wrapped it up, like
If she'd
she
shown up at that thing at the end, it just
maybe
she
she
wasn't there. I mean, I love
yeah,
that they had that clarinet player. Like I
yeah,
actually really like that
yeah.
whole bit where it's like just play because you want to play. Like
Yeah, and like I like that clarinet player went on to not be a musician. She went to be on to be, a politician. But apparently, I mean, she can still play the clarinet, so she probably kept up with it to some
but it was
degree.
also about him making her feel important and like she mattered regardless of what
Yes.
how her playing was, and that was what that was about. And that's something we talk about with sports movies. And I think
Yeah.
part of the reason you like Rudy is, so many sports movies are about like, being the best of the best. And it's
Yeah.
like, and often a character's journey is that they prove that they are the best, and that's why they should get to keep playing. And there aren't very many that are like, maybe you should just play a sport because you like playing it, not because you're brilliant at it.
One of the things in American cinema that I think we have too much of, and that may or may not be a contribution to some of the problems we have societally, I'm not going to go that far, but is that we overemphasize the success of the individual, specifically
Exceptionalism
the
kind of a
exceptionalism. And it's like we're putting that in the wrong place. Our first responders, our grocery store workers, like I think right now I've always felt this way, but right now there's a lot more of a focus on that because they have to stay working in the middle of the pandemic and they're the grocery
yeah,
worker, and that's usually deemed as lesser work. And I
right.
get it, it doesn't require you to go to a technical school. It doesn't require you to go to college, at least for
Right.
maybe management, whatever. But like you don't have the career path that doesn't involve institutions of education beyond high school, and in fact not even high school necessarily. But I always think that's really dumb. Like
Yeah.
being exceptional does not mean that you are number one at what you do. Being exceptional is a lot larger term, and Mr. Holland's Open is kind of about that. And Rudy, you're right, is really about that, because Rudy is about.
I've never seen Rudy. I need to see it, but you've told me about it, so that's why I know this.
It's not really a Sarah movie, but you probably should see it. I like it. It really is about somebody who's like just trying to succeed at a much smaller like level. Like our success is measured in how we, like, some people are not going to be able to do things other people can do because like they have a physical disability or a mental disability, or just because we don't really fully understand how brains work, and some people aren't as good at math as others and whatever. So it's like Rudy just wants to make the team. He doesn't want, he's not like going to be number one. He just wants to make the team. And so I kind of like, and the whole, and in Mr. Holland's Opus, it's like he wanted to be a composer and he finds meaning in his life outside of that, but it doesn't necessarily feel worthwhile. And I like the point being that like, no, our teachers are important, and specifically teachers too. And this is from 1995, and it's of an era where like, I remember when I was a kid, and I would have been in kindergarten in 95, but, or first grade, whatever, that like in that era, maybe, I don't know where it starts or where it ends, but like from there until the 2000s, and I graduated in 07 from high school, like that whole time, there was lots of discussion about money getting cut from schools. I imagine it's still a problem. And like the music programs and like anything that isn't math or English or science, basically being cut, you know, like drama.
Oh no, that was talked about you know, and I'm 7 years older than you, so it was happening 7 years earlier for me the whole time too.
So it's like this, and the whole, I think what we're discovering now, and I mean, Mr. Holland's point is like, if you take away these programs and you only leave the math and the science and the whatever, eventually they're going to have nothing left to write about, because culture and art is so much of what like our leisure time is. Like it's
that's why some people talk about STEAM over STEM, because STEM is like what, science, technology, engineering, and math or something like that. And I think the A that they add is art. Like art is important.
And like my whole life is about like my appreciation of culture and art. Like we watch movies constantly. I read very regularly. I try to learn about art. Like that's my life. And I'm somebody whose job is basically like to do Excel spreadsheets, you know, and manage things, like manage projects. And it's like, I'm maybe good at one thing to make money, but the other thing is what fulfills me. And it's, I think that's really, that's an interesting time capsule piece of this movie, because that really was important for decades and probably still is, and how like the money's being cut and like, so I don't know. I may have run out of things to talk about.
Oh, I think the last thing I wanted to say is, because we were talking about all these movies, interesting. So I watched this on Amazon, and it likes to give really random suggestions for what to watch next. But in this case, it was Dead Poets Society. Have you seen Dead Poets Society?
Never, like maybe I don't think I've ever seen it in like one.
It's interesting. I feel like Dead Poets Society is the cynical version of Mr. Holland's Opus, and not in that the ending is that a teacher doesn't make an important difference in your life, but just the way the teacher is ultimately, the way things come down is much darker. There's a lot more darker stuff, and it's interesting to me as a culture. Again, I have problems with Mr. Holland's Opus, mostly with the dialogue and just some of the on the nosiness of it. But it's interesting that culturally we really do value these more cynical outlooks, because at the same time as Dead Poets Society has this darker view, it's not like it's addressing race. It's about rich kids. Like it's just because it's kind of cynical and darker doesn't mean that it's really making that much bigger a statement. So it's just kind of, because I think Dead Poets Society is more well regarded. And you know, whether or not I can't say, but it was interesting to rewatch.
I forgot. I had one other point to make, which is I didn't talk at all about the cinematic nature of the movie, and it's well shot. It's pretty to look at, but it's not like exceptional to me really with how it's shot. It's kind of, I mean, maybe when I talk about it being a standard movie, I almost think about the filmmaking, because like I don't really notice anything unique about how it's being shot. It's kind of just, it's well done. You get all the angles right. You do some neat little edits here and there. The way we montage through time is kind of fun, if a little, I don't know that it perfectly fits, but it's pretty neat. And the music is done by someone named Michael Kamen, who it looks like has done a number of important scores. And weirdly, I liked a lot of the music in the movie. And yet at the same time, I was like, I get it that this is a movie about music, but can we play a little less music? Like I meant the scores. I mean the score specifically. Like halfway through it, I was like, Jesus, guys, I'll feel things. You don't need to push this hard with the music. But I also have like the dialogue is has a few moments where it's not that interesting.
Yeah.
The on the nose nature of like some of this moments are a bit much. But yeah. It's ultimately an enjoyable movie. It's kind of a movie I can't really imagine coming back to. I'm more likely to watch like, I don't know, probably Remember the Titans or something more like than this. But at the same time, like, you know, it's a pretty solid movie. So if you're into sentimental movies, especially, like, I would totally.
If you're needing a feel-good movie, if you're feeling like your life has no relevance and you just want to watch something that kind of reminds you of why our lives have relevance, it's not a bad pick. I'm not looking for that often, to be honest.
No, this is really not like, this is not you're in my wheelhouse, but occasionally this is something we come for.
I cried at the end, man. I was like,
you know, I got teary and was like, oh, I've got all the feels in my chest right now.